capacity is essentially how resources are utilized under extreme circumstances. And the example that is typically given is like a natural disaster, say a hurricane. When a hurricane is approaching, there are certain things that one has to do to prepare. And this takes both physical and mental energy. You have to board up windows. You have to stock up on supplies. You have to, you are stressed in part because of the uncertainty of events. How bad is it going to be? What's going to happen? How are people going to be impacted? That takes a certain amount of mental energy to prepare for that and manage that. And so people operate on what's called surge capacity, sort of maximum capacity, both in terms of physical energy and mental energy. And typically with something like a hurricane, it passes. It may be days, it may be weeks, sometimes months, you're dealing with the fallout, but at some point it passes, and then you are able to replenish your energy. What makes sort of this past year kind of qualify as this unprecedented times is essentially that we have had to operate at surge capacity essentially for the last year. And as you can imagine, that's exhausting. To be sort of dealing with the uncertainty of the situation is very stressful from a mental perspective. There are certainly physical things that we have had to do, right? I joke, and I've heard other people talk about this, I don't know about you, but never before in my life have I had, I forgot my mask dreams. But from time to time, I will have I'm out in public and I have forgotten my mask dream. There are things that we have to do a lot more, more things we have to grab as we're going out the door and make sure we have. There's more attending to washing and depending on your degree of concern, wiping down groceries, monitoring packages. There's a great deal of physical energy that we normally don't expend day to day that we've had to expend. And again, that mental energy of that uncertainty. In fact, one of the things that I think is noteworthy about this pandemic is one of the greatest causes of anxiety for people is uncertainty. And I think that, and in situations, in conditions of uncertainty, we try to control whatever we can to create some certainty, some predictability. And I think we all saw at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty about a particular household item, toilet paper, that many people dealt with by buying large quantities of toilet paper because they were anxious, because there was some uncertainty around, is this something that's going to run out? You don't want to run out of toilet paper. You do what you can to at least control an aspect of this, which is I'll just make sure I have enough toilet paper on hand, especially given there are all these other things I'm uncertain about. So we really have gotten kind of this worldwide masterclass in uncertainty and unpredictability and how that impacts anxiety. So again, when this stuff is happening in the background, it's taking a tremendous amount of energy, this surge capacity. There's also something else that happens when you are operating at this maximum capacity. Your skills get compromised. Many skills get compromised, but in particular, as it pertains to how we are interacting with each other, how we are interacting with our children, we lose access to some very important skills. We lose access to things like empathy, perspective, flexibility, frustration tolerance. You may find yourself, sort of practically speaking, you may find yourself feeling more easily annoyed. You may find yourself snapping at your partners or your children more readily. This is because our skill, those kinds of skills, our ability to manage frustration, our ability to think about other people's perspectives and understand them, our ability to be flexible in our thinking gets undermined, gets compromised, gets restricted. And so we find ourselves being more easily annoyed at things that normally we would roll with, for example. And this, of course, as you can imagine, leads to increased conflict, right? So as we get more frustrated, as we have a harder time being flexible, as we have a harder time seeing what other people are thinking and feeling and going through, that's going to naturally increase conflict. And of course, it doesn't help that we also at the same time don't have a lot of alone time, that we have increased time that we are spending with a small number of people. So that's going to increase conflict as well. And so given all of this, given how long people have been operating at this surge capacity, at this maximum capacity, given what that does to our skills, given the sort of natural increase in conflict that happens, there are a couple very kind of basic practical things that we can do under these conditions to manage that. And one of the most important things that we can do, and this is going to sound maybe a little simplistic, but also not simple by any means, is to be very realistic about our expectations for ourselves and for others. I was having a conversation with some educators not too long ago where they were frustrated by what felt very much like mixed messages they were getting, which was, these are unprecedented times and we are going to operate as if, as business as usual. And that doesn't match up, right? Unprecedented times and business as usual do not align. If it's unprecedented times, it is not usual. And we can't be expected just to function as we normally would. But interestingly enough, my experience in talking with many educators, many parents, many kids, is that there's a tremendous amount of guilt that adults feel when they are not meeting these sort of expectations that they have for themselves, again, under these sort of unusual circumstances. So having realistic expectations allows us to free ourselves from the guilt that we feel for not doing better. I heard it very succinctly put by someone I was talking with not too long ago, that it's okay not to be okay. I think there is kind of this sense of you just got to barrel through, and it's fine and everything's fine, and it's not, and that's okay. Now I have to put a little coda on this because I've been doing this talk now for several months, and I have to admit it feels a little bit different today than it felt a few months ago. There does seem to be a little bit of a light shining at the end of that tunnel. It feels a little bit more hopeful than it did even a month or two ago, that we're going to be getting back to some place of relative normal. That's exciting. And as Matt and I were talking about before this started, the sun is shining again. That's very nice. It's going to be light later. That's very nice. And I'll come back to that when I talk about the social interactions. But nevertheless, we've been doing this for a very long time. And so being realistic about what you can accomplish over the course of the day, being realistic about what your kids are going to do. I will come back to this point when we talk about screen time use. Really allows you to remove this, or at least reduce this background guilt. Because when you have unrealistic expectations for what you can accomplish over the course of a day, and then you feel guilty about it, that takes energy, right? And if we've talked about how we are already operating at maximum capacity, at this surge capacity, you don't want to put increasing demands on that mental energy. So when you have realistic expectations and then you're feeling less guilty, you are reducing that mental energy that you need, because feeling guilty takes mental energy. It's draining. And so realistic expectations are really a key part of managing this surge capacity. The other thing I'll say, and there's additional ideas too, and you can read about some of this online, but the other thing I will say that a concept that I particularly like is embracing what is called a both and philosophy. I think the other thing that people interestingly feel guilty about is maybe there's some parts of this pandemic that haven't been so bad. Maybe it's kind of nice to especially if you are someone who is a bit more introverted. Maybe it's kind of nice not to have to make an excuse to not go to a party, for example. I have a daughter who started college this year. And for the second semester, she went to campus for the first semester, but for the second semester, she goes to school in the South, and cases were increasing, as we know, over the winter months pretty rapidly. And the school, of course, offered kids to attend the second semester remotely, and we took advantage of that. As a dad, I am thrilled that she is back in the nest, as it were, and I get more time with her. That's a silver lining, and yet at the same time, things have been pretty awful, and many people have suffered in many ways. And it's not either or. You can embrace a both and philosophy. You can be aware of the tremendous negatives and pain and suffering that have occurred over the last year, and at the same time be thankful for the things that have maybe been nice about the situation. And again, not feel having that you have to deny those things, and not feeling like you have to feel guilty about acknowledging those things. So again, embracing this both and philosophy frees you from some of the mental energy drain that can occur with some of this. So that's the context. That's the context in which we've been living for the past year, the impact it's had on us, and some specific things we might do to kind of buffer their effects. What I'm going to switch to now is talking about what learning has looked like over this past year. And I realize that there's probably a variety of experience here on this Zoom call. Of people, some students may be in school full time. Some students may be remote full time, and then variations in between. But I'm going to focus on the remote learning part and talk about some specific strategies for the typical struggles that have come up in the context of remote learning. And again, you're going to see one of my biggest goals for people is to address the natural tendency for sort of increased battles and conflicts that occur with our kids under these circumstances. One of the conflicts that has naturally arisen is trying to get your kids to do school under these, again, very difficult circumstances. And that may range from trying to get your kid to keep their camera on during class, or to do their homework at the end of the school day. I see a comment here that popped up, trying to keep your kids awake during class, trying to manage the school load, trying to get kids to class on time. And certainly the challenges for younger students are quite different than the challenges for older students, but there have been challenges across the board. What I want to give you as a way of reducing the conflicts that naturally occur under those circumstances is to give you a different way of thinking about how we might help our kids to the extent possible participate, do their work, do all these things that we very realistically expect them to do. What typically happens under these circumstances is we ask ourselves the wrong question. So when I have a child who is not getting to class on time, who is not turning their camera on, who is refusing to do their work when school is over, nope, my computer's off, I'm done, whatever the case may be. The question that we typically ask ourselves, and it's a very understandable question, is how do I get him or her to XYZ? How do I get her to keep her camera on? How do I get her to get to class on time? How do I get him to do the schoolwork afterwards. And I'm seeing in some of the comments, right, that these are particularly pronounced, and it's actually a really helpful point, right? Particularly pronounced if you have maybe some executive function struggles, ADHD, difficulty sustaining attention, difficulty organizing, all those kind of things. And it actually, it tells us that we have to, it's a good goal to have our kids engaged, doing their work, getting to class on time, all those kind of things. But the question, how do I get him to, is what inevitably leads to conflict, because essentially it creates I'm trying to get him or her to do it, and he or she is trying not to. And that is a setup for adversarial conflict, battles, and all the like. The key is to ask yourself a very different question. Instead of asking the question, how do I get him to, oh, there's a great comment here. I've tried everything, bribes, threatens, taking away. Yes, exactly, exactly. Those are all designed to get him or her to do it. Now, again, good goal, but wrong question. So instead of asking, how can I get him to, which is going to lead to, can I make a threat? Can I bribe? Can I incentivize? Ask a different question. Ask yourself the question, what's getting in the way? What's making it hard? What is making it difficult for him to get online? What is making it difficult for her to do her homework? What is making it hard for him to get from class to class on the computer? When you ask that question, it points you in a very different direction. It points you, instead of the direction, how can I essentially affect compliance? It points you in the direction of how can I help? And it changes the conversation. So you sit down with your child and you say, okay, you're not getting to class on time. Let's figure that out. Why is it? I'm tired, or I forget, or I don't like that class, or the teacher wants me to have my camera on and I don't feel comfortable having my camera on, so I just skip the class. The same behavior, the same outward behavior, not getting to class, can have very different reasons. And for any one of these difficulties, I can give you at least half a dozen, if not a dozen, different possible reasons that would lead us to very different interventions. If this is about, I don't feel comfortable having my camera on, that's obviously going to be dealt with in a very different way than I forget because I'm so distracted, I go do other things and then I lose track of time, right? Those are two reasons why a child may not engage, but very different reasons requiring very different solutions. So the key here is to ask the question, first ask yourself, but then ideally engage your child in this conversation. What's getting in the way? When we think about behavior from the standpoint of misbehavior, it inclines us toward punishment. It inclines us toward contingency. But when we look at misbehavior instead as a struggle that the child is having, it naturally inclines us toward helping them. And that changes then from an adversarial relationship to a working relationship, to let's you and I work together to help figure out what we do about the fact that you don't feel comfortable on the camera, or to help figure out what to do about the fact that you're having to track a lot of different links and times and all that kind of stuff, and it feels unmanageable. Ask those questions. Ask them kind of in the grand scheme of things, but also ask them directly, and you will be on a very different trajectory. Now, there is someone in the chat makes a really important point, that the school doesn't care about what's making it hard, and I think it is it can absolutely feel that way. That the school can also be stuck in the same sort of compliance mode. Your kid's getting bad grades, they need to buck up and get with the program and get better grades, right? We are all at risk for this kind of way of approaching things from a sort of basically compliance contingency standpoint. So change the conversation and you change the outcome. Change the way you think about it and you change the outcome. Change the way you approach it and you change the outcome. So I'm going to be I'm sort of conscious of the time, but we are going to have some time for some additional questions at the end here. But overall, keep focused on this, not how do I get him to, but what's getting in the way. Answer that question accurately, and you will be able to change and support your child to be able to meet those expectations. Okay. And by the way, there's great questions. I am tracking some of them, but I'm also going to rely on Matt later to look through them and share some of the ones that I missed. Okay.
Yeah, Larry, I just wanted to mention that I'm keeping track. So feel free to answer as you go too, like you've been doing, which has been super helpful, but I'm keeping track as well.
Perfect. So if I miss a question, we can come back to that in the Q&A part. Okay, I'm going to move to the social challenges now. And that is that for all of us, right, we have had to do social interactions, be with friends, be with others in a very different way than we are used to. And again, that can lead to some conflicts, some battles, especially, and I'll talk about this because again, it seems to be the number one concern, especially with a lot of our kids. It has led to an over-reliance on a very easy way to both pass the time when there are fewer options and oftentimes to engage socially, and that is screen time. Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, YouTube, you know, and not just kids, right? Binge watching is at an all-time high for us adults as well. But when the options have become more limited or more difficult, it is natural that you are going to go to the path of least resistance. You're going to go to the easiest thing to access. And we also know, of course, that screens are very easy and in fact can have a sort of, for many of our kids, an addictive kind of quality. And that again increases conflicts as you are trying to get your child to use less screen time, to stop the screen time when it's time to go to dinner or go to bed or go to school or whatever the case may be. And so my first bit of advice is similar to what we were talking about with just surge capacity in general, is to free yourself from the guilt of my kid's on screens too much and I feel terrible about it. Sure, they're on screens too much. A lot of people are. There's been something like, I think Roblox published some data that there's been an 80% increase in usage. So yes, kids are relying on screens a lot and more than is ideal. But again, these are not ideal circumstances. This is not business as usual. So our expectations need to adjust. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't work on it. But what I want to be really clear about it is battling over it just adds to the stress. It doesn't reduce it. So free yourself from the guilt of you know, I can't tell you how many parents are like, you know I don't want them on the screens, but sometimes I just need a blanking break. And so therefore, maybe I go, fine, go watch YouTube, go play Roblox, whatever the case may be. That's okay. That's okay. It's going to happen, and beating yourself up over it doesn't help. Now, that said, there are things that we can do to try to ease the use, ease the process of stopping. And I'm going to give you two strategies for helping with that. I'm going to start with the stopping the screen time, because even when we have our kids on screens more than we would like, there are still times when we would like them to come to dinner, we would like them to get ready for bed, we'd like them to get ready for school, whatever the case may be. And that transition off is very difficult. There is a neurobiological process that happens when kids are engaged, or adults for that matter, are engaged in something that is highly engaging, highly interesting, highly enjoyable. Basically, what happens from a brain perspective is the brain is flooded with those positive neurochemicals that feel really, really good. And when we try to get our kids to stop, and the process goes something like this: hey, it's time to stop. We're going to be eating dinner soon. Just 5 more minutes. I just want to finish. Okay, 5 more minutes, but then you got to stop. Okay, I will. 15 minutes later, come on, it's time to stop. I will. I'm just finishing this thing. Leave me alone. Okay, but we're waiting for you, and dinner's getting cold. Like, fine, fine, I will. So another 15 minutes go by. Child's still on the process. Adults starting to get upset, and then at some point, some version of that's it. I'm taking it away, whether it's physically grabbing it, unplugging the Xbox, turning off the Wi-Fi. There are variations of basically flipping off the switch. And here's what happens from a brain perspective. And I know someone in the chat said it is like being on drugs. There is an addictive kind of process that can happen for lots of kids. And so when you turn it off, in that I'm pulling the plug, I'm grabbing the remote, whatever the case may be, you trigger the fight or flight response in the brain, because you have basically, the analogy that's used is you've taken a hose that is pouring out water and you've tried to just turn the spigot off. And that triggers the fight or flight response. And we've seen that, right? It may literally be a fight. It may be screaming. It may be throwing the controller across the room. It may be, kicking, hitting, whatever. There can be some extreme reactions because that fight or flight response has been triggered. What that means is, from a brain perspective, what's going to be more helpful in terms of transitioning off, in terms of stopping this particular thing. It's always harder to stop something you're enjoying to go to something that's maybe not as enjoyable, is think about that spigot. Instead of trying to just shut it off, which triggers the fight or flight response, you want to slowly turn it down, much like you would a hose that is just pouring out water. You're going to slowly turn it down. How do you do that? There is a process by which you need to build a bridge between what the child is doing and what you ultimately want them to do. And you as the adult are a crucial part of that bridge. So what it looks like is basically sitting down with the child and starting to engage with them around what they're doing. Oh, where are you going? What are you building there? Oh, I see. Oh, okay. You're looking for some more wood to build another part of your house. Got it. Oh, okay. What's going on here? Oh, I see. And you start to engage with them. What that does is, one, it starts to slowly turn down the spigot because their attention is now being shared between what they're doing and you. So that's the very beginning of it. But then what it allows you to do once you have that connection is to look for a concrete stopping point and help your child make that stopping point. Okay, we're going to be having dinner soon. Where are you at, and what's a place that you might be able to kind of wrap up where you've hit, a place where they can save the game if that's the case, one last task. You think about our younger kids who are struggling with this when we're at the playground. We can say 5 more minutes, that kind of works, but oftentimes you don't have a concept of time, but rather 5 more times down the slide, right? Something kind of concrete, and then it's time to go. So you do this engaging and you slowly turn down that spigot, and they are able then to turn it off and come to dinner or whatever the case may be. Now, it is hard, and someone is pointing out here that if I try to do that, my kid is going to say, this is not what's written in the chat, but something along the lines of get the F out of here. And so it is a difficult task, no question about it. It is better than battling, and it may take some practice, and it may take some um, pre-discussions with your child. So if you have a kid who is absolutely resistant to this, I would talk with them about this process, and I would help them understand what's going on. And what's crucial is not to do okay, here's the deal. Until you show me that you can turn it off when I tell you, you don't get to use it, right? Because this is not something that they're simply choosing not to do. This is something that's hard for them. So the messaging needs to be, this is hard for you. I understand that it's hard for you and I want to help you with it. And so we're going to work together and I'm going to help you. And that may take some time, but we're going to do this together and I'm on your side. As much as you can decrease the adversarialness and increase the working together, you're going to get much better results. Okay.
Larry, I'm
Yes.
sorry. I had a question come through that
Yes.
relates directly to this, and it's a real life example.
Great.
So let me just read this question off to you. Should we take away the Roblox game screen time? My 11-year-old has been playing, and she said it is um, for her social time with her friend. However, I caught her playing while she was on her Zoom class. I'm struggling to control her on this situation. I definitely feel like as a parent, my tolerance level is beyond our capacity as she won't stop playing. What should we do with our kids' addiction to screen time?
Great question. Yes. So a couple things. So that first part of the question, do we just say, okay, that's it, no Roblox time or whatever? The hard part about that is, again, with limited options right now, it is a time when some kids are getting most of their social needs met. It is a time when kids are getting some of their leisure time, fun time needs met. And so with limited options, it gets to be more difficult. Now, yes, that does then inevitably lead to doing it at times that aren't okay, like when they're supposed to be on their Zoom calls. And this is happening so much. We're very well aware of it. But I don't advocate for saying, that's it, you blew it, no Roblox at all. What I advocate for is a two-step process. One is setting very clear parameters around when is okay and when is not okay. And it is okay to say, you know what, we're not going to do Roblox in the morning because it's just too hard then to get to school when you're stuck in it. But we will do it after school because we have a little bit more flexibility and I can help you go through this process of winding down. But that's just, we just don't have the time or the bandwidth early in the process. So yeah, you want to put some parameters around it. But then what's most important is when they're not meeting those parameters, when they are struggling, like they're doing it during their Zoom class as well as at the time that's appropriate, you work with them on it. You sit down with them on it and you talk about it and you figure it out together. Again, asking this very important question, what makes it hard? What makes it hard to not go play Roblox when you're on your Zoom call? Is it the allure of Roblox, which may be part of it, or is it the boringness of the class that I happen to be in right now? There are a number of different reasons. So if you stay focused on how can I help you rather than how do I get you to comply, you are going to ultimately get there. And I don't mean to suggest at all that this is easy, but I can help it be easier. It is much harder to battle about it. It puts stress on the relationship. It increases other conflict. So work together, set some clear parameters, but then the parameters that aren't being met, those are the things you work on together. Okay, I'm going to talk about one other strategy. So one of the things that I always say is it's very hard to stop doing something. It is easier to do something instead. So this is true whether you have a child who's hitting, or a child who's overusing screen time, or a child who's engaging in other kinds of behaviors that are undesirable. And so rather than thinking about it as, I want them to not do this, think about what you would like them to do instead and facilitate that. So when it comes to screen time, again, instead of thinking about, how do I get him or her to use less screen time, think about what are some other options that we might be able to facilitate. And the best way to think about this is to think about reducing barriers to entry. Again, remember, it is very easy to get on the Xbox, to get on the PlayStation, to pull out the Switch. It's easy to access. So when you are trying to promote alternatives to the screen time use or other things that your child is doing that you would prefer that they didn't do so much, think about alternate options, and then think about barriers to entry. The easier you can make it to access, the better. I'll just give you one example. Oftentimes, this comes up a lot. We want our kids to get together with friends, and so we encourage them to call their friends, and they don't. And then you say, why don't you call your friends? Oh, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Oh, come on, call them. You can get together, right? Okay. Right now, if your priority is, and you know they're going to have a great time if they get together with their friends, but something's getting in the way of them organizing that, there's nothing wrong with organizing it for them. There's nothing wrong if that's a barrier. If reaching out to a friend for whatever reason is a barrier, eliminate that barrier. It's okay. You're not enabling. It's okay to say, hey, how about if I just reach out to their mom and see if they're available? That's okay. Right now is not a time to do some tremendous learning. Right now is a time to survive. And if having them have some time with their friends means that they're going to be on screen time a little bit less, but it involves maybe doing something that you'd rather them do themselves, like making the call, don't worry about it. Make the call. Reduce those barriers to entry. I think I saw someone just wrote something about, you know, signing them up for activities, right? Great. Just make sure that what you're signing them up for is something that they are going to be as excited about as possible, right? If you sign them up for something new and they don't like new things, it's going to be a battle. If you sign them up for something that they've done before and they really have enjoyed, it's going to be a lot easier. So again, think about it in terms of reducing barriers to entry. Make it as easy as possible for them to access those alternate activities, and you are going to have much greater success, and then they're going to sort of do other things. And the really nice thing, and then I'm going to stop talking so I can take a sip of water and we can have some questions. The really nice thing about what's happening right now is that the options are going to increase. It's going to be lighter later. It's going to be warmer. A lot of the beginning of this pandemic was easier in some ways because we went right into warmer and warmer weather. Things got really hard in the wintertime because options really shut down. And we know a lot of our kids need to be active, need to be physical. Those things are going to open up again. So get as creative as possible and reduce those barriers to entry. Think about what you'd like them to do instead, and you're going to have much more success. Okay, I'm going to stop with the lecture part here, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt for some questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Larry. That was awesome. And there's some really, really great content in this chat. Let's see. Just scrolling through here. All right, this is a great question here. Sometimes it's very difficult to find a solution to the problem if you're asking, using the strategy of what's getting in the way. Where/how do we find help to solve the problem once it is identified? I guess so. Once the thing that's getting in the way is identified, the fear of the solution or not finding a solution might sometimes be the reason we don't ask. It is easier as a school or parent to push the problem back to the child to solve the problem by punishing if they don't perform instead of finding solutions.
Great points and great question. Interestingly, right, I'll talk about that last part first. If we are struggling to come up with a solution, and in fact, we are worried about going there because we're struggling to find a solution, why do we think that it would be any easier for the child to do that, right? And essentially, when you utilize punishments, threats, incentives even, you are asking the child to solve it themselves, right? If they are having some trouble with something and you say, well, look, you can't do what you're doing, so if you keep doing that, you're going to be in big trouble. It forces them to do it all on their own, to figure out what the problem is and to come up with some solution. Therefore, yes, it absolutely, sometimes when you go there, you learn things where you're like, well, dang, I don't know what to do about that. Okay, that's all right. There's a great Einstein quote that says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes figuring out what the problem is and 5 minutes coming up with a solution. If you are finding yourself stuck, spend more time figuring out what the problem is. It is entirely possible. If you find yourself saying, I don't know what to do about this, it is entirely possible that you still don't know exactly what the problem is. And the better that you can specify the problem, the easier it's going to be to solve. So put your energy toward not toward what's the solution going to be, but toward what is the problem. I'll give you a good example of this where people really stop very short. Um, I say to a kid, how come you're not doing your math homework? And they say, because I don't want to. Like, okay, well, I don't know how to solve that, because if you don't want to, then we got to figure out a way to make you want to. And for what it's worth, I don't know how to make kids want to do things they don't want to do. I don't think any of us do. I think we maybe can get kids to do things they don't want to do, but none of us is able to get a kid to want to do something they don't want to do. But the good news is that's really not the issue. So if we stop at I don't want to, we're going to have a really hard time coming up with any kind of solution. However, if we probe a little bit more, say, why don't you want to, right? Um, and by the way, they might have a hard time telling us, so we might have to take some guesses. We might have to ask some questions. We might have to, you know, run some theories and say, well, maybe it's this. What do you think? Well, I don't know, maybe. All right, well, let's try something based on that. Think about why you might struggle with something like that and just pose some questions. Okay, why don't you want to? Is it boring? Is it too hard? Is it too easy? Does it feel overwhelming? Does it feel like too much? Are there other things you would that you're not able to do because you're spending time on this? There could be a whole host of reasons, and so think that through. And I find thinking in categories to be a really helpful strategy if you're stuck. Think about the game 20 questions, right? Person's thinking of something, and we say, okay, is it an animal? Is it a vegetable? Is it a mineral? An animal. Great. I'm in the animal category now. Is it a domestic animal or a wild animal? Domestic animal. Great. I'm in the domestic animal category now. Does it have a tail? No. Great. I'm in a domestic animals without tail category now. When you think in categories, right, you can more efficiently narrow in on what the problem is. So if I've got a kid who's not doing their work, think about categories, why you might not do work. An obvious one is it's too hard, right? So the level of challenge. But another not so obvious category might be, I'm worried I'm not going to do it well. And if I don't do it well, that means I'm really a terrible student, and that's very painful to me. Nothing to do with the level of difficulty so much as the perceived, how am I going to do on this? Think of another category. What do you have to do when you're doing work? You have to be able to concentrate. So one bucket, if you will, would be concentration. Are there external distractions? Are there internal distractions? Are there things that make it hard to focus? So when you think in terms of these buckets, in terms of these categories, you can ask some questions that help you narrow in. So if you find yourself stuck for a solution, first ask the question, have I adequately defined and understood what the problem is? And if not, spend some more time doing that. If you have, however, if you feel like, nope, we understand it really well, I just don't know what to do about it, well, then that's a really good time to find an expert in that area. I work with a lot of kids and families who the child really struggles to get an adequate night's sleep. And we know when you haven't had a good night's sleep, everything seems harder, everything, you're feeling more on edge, things are more difficult. I have some limited expertise and some basics of helping people get a good night's sleep. But there are times when I've exhausted my resources of what to do to improve sleep. And then we call a sleep expert and we maybe do a sleep study. So if you feel like you've adequately defined the problem, but you still are stuck for a solution, find someone who has expertise in that particular category of difficulty.
And thank you for that, Larry. And this feels like a perfect segue to bring up this next point that the parent brought up. You know, having a 16-year-old child that says that what's getting in their way is that they don't care about school and they don't want to be involved with school. And also, to make matters a little more challenging, you know, in this scenario of asking the questions to try to figure out, all right, what's really going on here? The child, they're 16, so they don't really want to engage with mom or dad, whoever it is. So I figured I'd bring that up.
Great. Yeah, really important point. I'm going to really oversimplify this answer. And by that, I mean, and yes, it is certainly a challenge as you get into those upper teen years. You know, I think it's Stephen Covey who says, seek first to understand. I think that we spend so much time and energy as parents trying to persuade, cajole, convince our kids to do the things that we very understandably want them to do. But again, that especially with kids as they get older can create that distance and that adversarialness, right? And even though we don't always intend it to, it can certainly come across as scolding or lecturing or nagging. And so to paraphrase the musical Hamilton, talk less, listen more. I think that if you focus your energy not on nagging, convincing, persuading, but really instead on understanding and listening, you will go, you will get much further in those conversations. And sometimes that means saying to your child and acknowledging, you know what? I've been doing a lot of telling you what you're doing wrong. I've been doing a lot of trying to convince you that you got to do this thing or that thing. It probably feels like nagging. It probably feels like criticism. And it's no wonder that perhaps you are not thrilled when you see me coming. Here comes another one of those conversations. So I want to do it differently. So instead, I just want to understand. I just want to listen. I want to know how you're doing. I want to know what this has been like for me. Oh, you want to know what this has been like for me? Yeah, I really do. It sucks, okay? Yeah, it does. Tell me more. I want to know what sucks about it. Help me understand it. A little empathy and a little understanding and a little listening goes a very long way. So again, change your approach, change the outcome. I think that we naturally are inclined toward, again, compliance. How do I get him to? But if we can change the approach, change the nature of our conversation, one toward more listening and understanding, we are going to see much more engagement.
And Larry, I know we only have a minute here, but this last question, any tips to help with executive functions for a young man, 16, ADHD? His go-to is avoidance and to lie.
Yeah, so the key here is, you know, executive function is a really big umbrella and covers a lot of different skills, and depending on who you ask, covers either a more narrow band or a larger band. But specificity is the key. So I can't answer the question, how do you help with executive function, without noting that we need to know more specifically what, for this particular child, are the executive function struggles. And it's going to vary depending on the situation, because certain tasks require certain executive function skills. So what I would say is, and there's Richard Guare, Guare, and Peg Dawson have some really good, easy to use checklists. that you can go through and fill out together that will help you determine, is this a task initiation problem, for example, versus a goal setting problem, versus a sustaining attention problem, versus an organizing and planning problem. There's some really good, easy to use checklists that can help narrow in on the specific executive function struggle, which can then help you intervene. I will say, and I know we do need to wrap up here, but the last thing I'll say is there's a really good website. It's understood.org. And understood.org is a website that has all sorts of resources for all sorts of learning struggles. And they have some specific executive function kinds of strategies and tools and ideas and that kind of thing. So I like that website a lot. I think you can find some more strategies there. And then of course, Sarah Ward, who some of you probably already know, is a local expert who does a lot of good practical strategies for executive function. So I would look to see if she is speaking anytime soon. You'll get some really great tips.
She's speaking with us April 17th, I believe. So
I did not get paid for that endorsement. Totally kismet. That's excellent because she's wonderful.
Right. And I will, there's some more things in the chat. I will address those in the follow-up email, as well as sending the links. I believe someone asked for someone's last name and checklist. So I will send that out. Larry, thank you so much. And thank you to this audience today. It was a very, very engaged audience, which was great. And it made things so much better.
Excellent. All right. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.